Did you get your Hunger Games fix over the weekend? Welcome to Off Duty. I'm Wendy Bounds. I know I did. I'm moving on to Book 2, Catching Fire. It's my second read, I have to admit it. Well, today's show, it's all about fun and games. We have Hunger Games trivia, we've got music, we've got March Madness, and first up, we've got Paul Vigna, and he's got the update on the NCAA tournament. Take a look.
We started with 4, trying to be part of the 64. We're back down to 4. We have 2 games left, and one of them, at least in Kentucky, could be really one for the ages. Hi, I'm Paul Vigna, along with Wall Street Journal sports writer Rachel Bachman. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Paul?
Good games this weekend. We're down to the Final Four. Before we get to this Kentucky grudge match, which I think has the potential to just be an all-time game, let's quickly recap how we got here. And let's talk about Kansas.
Yeah.
Because to me, maybe I'm wrong, they're a 2 seed, but it doesn't seem like anybody was really talking about Kansas. And now they are in the Final Four in a statement game against North Carolina.
Yeah, and you have to remember with that game, there is a caveat because Kendall Marshall, UNC's star point guard, didn't play, he was injured. And so that certainly had an impact on the game. But Kansas is a big team. Their front court is formidable. Withy is a former volleyball player. He's a great shot blocker, and that really makes the fast break go, things like that. So I think that they matched up well with North Carolina, actually, and especially with Marshall not there to kind of make the offense go. They really exploited that. And Tyshawn Taylor, the point guard for Kansas, who had actually had a terrible tournament, had a great game, I think in part because he was matched up against Carolina's backup, Stillman White, who barely played during the season. Now,
do you think they'll be favored when they go up against Ohio, or who's got the edge in that game?
I think so. I think they do, yeah. And just because they've shown so much toughness, they're basically healthy. And, maybe Taylor got his confidence back a little bit, and that will certainly help the offense. And they match up pretty well with Ohio State. It's a big, bruising team, Jared Sullinger in the middle. And so Kansas is one of the few teams I think that will really match up well against them inside.
Yeah, let's go to the other side of the bracket, because I think this is where the real marquee is, right? You now have the gigantic Kentucky grudge match. In the Bluegrass State, this is going to be one for the ages, right? Kentucky against Louisville.
Yes.
Who looked better getting to the Final Four, in your opinion?
Well, I think Kentucky has been absolutely amazing. I mean, the few times they've shown weakness is when they've let a team come within 5 or 10 points of them, which illustrates their dominance. They've averaged 88 points a game in a tournament in which 88-point games have not been that common. And it just steamrolled everybody. I mean, they've got potential NBA draft picks all up and down the starting lineup. And Anthony Davis is as good a player as college basketball has seen in the last 10 years.
Now, I mean, Louisville, big defensive team. They look pretty good, too. They are, by the way, my pick to win the whole thing.
Louisville, okay. Look at you in the Final Four.
In the Final Four. If they win it, I'll be okay. If they lose it, I'm done, whatever. But if they win it, I'll be... They've looked pretty good. Good defensive team. Let's talk about the coaches for a second, because this is also a marquee coaching matchup, isn't it?
Yes.
Calipari versus Pitino.
Yes, and of course we all know Kentucky is a huge basketball state, deep roots in the hardwood, and Rick Pitino was actually the coach who revived the Kentucky basketball program after it had NCAA sanctions, actually led it to a national championship in '96, and then left to coach the Boston Celtics right before Kentucky won its last title in '98. And then he sparked ire across the state by leaving the NBA and taking over at Louisville, which of course is Kentucky's arch rival, which is pretty much the worst place he could have gone if you're a Kentucky fan. And here at Kentucky is John Calipari, who has had somewhat of a checkered past. He's had 2 Final Four appearances vacated, and due to various improprieties in which he was not implicated, we should say, but parts of the program were. And so he's trying to get his first national title, and he certainly has the team to do it. And it would seem that Kentucky is pretty heavily favored in this matchup, but you can't underestimate the grudge match factor. I should mention that Kentucky did beat Louisville earlier this season, so they have
experience of going up against them and beating them. So who do you think is going to play for the national title?
I think it's looking like Kansas, Kentucky, and I think that would be an interesting matchup because of their great front courts, and I think they do actually match up pretty well in that way. I should mention, too, that Kansas beat Ohio State earlier this season, but Ohio State was playing without Jared Sullinger, which sort of makes for an interesting matchup because he's their best player, and so it'll be interesting to see both teams at full strength.
Yeah. Are you surprised that only one #1 seed made it to the Final Four?
You know, a little bit, and of course Louisville upset Michigan State, and so that was their marquee win of the tournament. But you know, outside of Kentucky, I don't think there was a team that was absolutely dominant. I mean, even Syracuse, which you know lost I think 2 games before it reached the tournament, you know, had the issue with an ineligible player, and who was, you know, Fab Melo, very key to the offense. And so I think that there was no other #1 seed that people expected to just steamroll to the final round, especially when the point guard at North Carolina got injured. So,
and you think Kentucky steamrolls to the title?
You know, I don't know about steamrolls. I think Kansas, if it makes through, will give them a great game. But you know, they're just so incredibly talented. It's hard to see anyone overpowering that.
Now, over the weekend, the NCAA tournament, it got winnowed down from the Elite 8 to the Final 4. That's coming up this coming weekend. My own bracket is not looking so good, but perhaps I'm doing better on the Hunger Game trivia. Here's another one for you. Do you know how many districts ringed the Capitol before the dark days of the uprising? While you think about that, I'm going to tell you about one of the riskiest pieces of music ever written. We've got our own John Jurgensen. He sits down right now to tell you all about it.
It's the equivalent of a death-defying leap, Paganini's 24 Caprices. He composed them in the early 19th century to demonstrate just how challenging violin technique could be. They're so tough to play that all 24 pieces are rarely performed at once. But our guest, Rachel Barton-Pine, is doing just that in a series of concerts. Rachel Barton-Pine, welcome.
Great to be here.
What was Paganini trying to prove by composing these pieces?
Well, I think he was sort of issuing a challenge like, I can play all of this stuff, can you? But I think in addition to explaining the technical capabilities of the violin, just how far you could go with the instrument physically, of course, we're not doing a sport, we're creating art. And so all of those pyrotechnics are a mean to an end. And really what he was doing in the bigger picture was expanding the expressive range of the violin past where it had ever been taken before.
So there are certain rules about what you physically can and cannot do on the violin. I assume he's bending these rules, so to speak. Is it about
pushing the boundaries for sure?
Is it about speed or is it dexterity? I'm sure it's a combination of both.
Well, all of that, as well as all kinds of crazy contortions. Paganini actually had the same disease as Abe Lincoln, Marfan's disease, commonly known as spider fingers, which causes all of your ligaments to be very loose in addition to other symptoms.
So you may have had an advantage, so to speak.
Well, yeah, now we have to try to play this stuff with healthy hands.
What would you show us for something that really was a challenge for you to learn?
Well, for a challenge was up-bow staccato. I was born with no up-bow staccato, and I had to fight for every notch on the metronome. This kind of stuff. But actually, the technique that I'm most known for among all of the Paganini caprices is my ricochet from Caprice number 5, which is bouncing the bow multiple times in one direction and then once in the other direction.
And when you're performing these 24 pieces, I assume there's one or the other where maybe mentally you know you're approaching it and you feel like you're steeling yourself for these moments. What's an example of one of the pieces that really kind of looms in your mind?
Well, actually, at this point, I've played the entire cycle in a single evening often enough that there are no more moments of fear. I know I can do it, and it's just about being prepared and having fun. One of the ones that I really look forward to after all the fast ones and all the fireworks is number 21, which really shows how Paganini was, at heart, a bel canto opera composer who just happened to be writing for the violin. And there's just such a beautiful melody. It sounds like singers ought to have words to it.
You also perform in a metal band as well called Earth and Grave. What would you say is the most metal part of 24 Caprices?
Well, you know, one time when I was hanging out with Slash and I was playing some Metallica riffs and whatever, and then I launched into Paganini's last Caprice, all the guys in his band went, "Hey, that's the 24th." It's like, you know, everybody knows that melody. Of course, it's got great power chords like...
Whew, I'm exhausted just watching that. All right, now back to our trivia. Did you figure it out? Drum roll, please. 13. That's how many it was. 13. And speaking of more Hunger Games trivia, do you know what they called the neighborhood in District 12 where Katniss Everdeen lived? This is the poorest part, not like the Capitol, which was the richest part. Think about that. But speaking of rich, our own Robert Frank, he's going to show you where the wealthiest in this real world live. Let's take a look at his Money Talks.
When it comes to where the wealthy like to live, the #1 rule is they like to live with other wealthy people. F. Scott Fitzgerald in The Great Gatsby talked about it as the consoling proximity of other millionaires, that millionaires like to be with other millionaires. And so what we've seen are the existing capitals of wealth in America, New York and San Francisco and Los Angeles, becoming global capitals of wealth. So you see a lot of Asians setting up their homes in San Francisco or LA, especially wealthy Chinese. You see in New York a lot of wealthy Russians and Indians suddenly buying real estate in New York. But we also have these new global capitals of wealth. In addition to New York, San Francisco, and LA, London has become a huge hub, not just for the British wealthy and the European wealthy, but predominantly for the Russian and Indian wealthy, and those from the Middle East. So London, I think, and New York are the two global hubs of wealth. But in Asia, there's been a very interesting change with Singapore, which is a tiny city-state, but due to very generous tax treatments for the wealthy. A lot of rich people from America, from China, are making Singapore their primary residence over places like Switzerland and Liechtenstein, which were previous hubs of wealth, but have gotten into a lot of banking issues and litigation and problems. So a lot of the new money that maybe used to go to Switzerland and Liechtenstein and maybe the Cayman Islands is now going to Singapore. The global rich also have this kind of interesting migration pattern every year, where there are certain events and certain places that they like to go in certain times of year. Art Basel in Miami. We have Davos, which is in February, where all the billionaires in the world and top leaders converge at the Davos ski resort. In the summer, if you're very wealthy, you have to be somewhere in the Mediterranean, usually south of France. And in the winter, you're usually in the Caribbean and maybe a little bit in Aspen. There's now this sort of global conference circuit for the wealthy where they all kind of converge at different times.
Did you get that last one? I know you've been thinking about it. Come on, you know it. It's the Seam. That is the neighborhood where Katniss lives in District 12. And now on to our very final question. What was the name of the treaty that actually gave rise to the Hunger Games in the very beginning? While you think about that one, we are going underground where musicians right now are celebrating the birthday of Johann Sebastian Bach.
My name is Dale Henderson, and today is Bach in the Subways Day. Bach in the Subways Day is a celebration of Johann Sebastian Bach's 327th birthday, and we've got, I think, 13 or 14 or 15 musicians throughout the New York City subways playing Bach for strap hangers for free. It's obviously not the ideal setting for classical music, because classical music almost always demands a longer amount of attention than, say, your average pop song or folk tune. So it can be difficult when the trains are rolling in the middle of the piece. That's the downside of it. The biggest reward behind it all is to see people's reactions, especially those who have never heard classical music. They're amazed, they're astounded, and the looks on people's faces when they're confronted unexpectedly with live classical music, live cello playing the Bach suites, is something amazing, hard to describe with words. absorbed, amazed, moved, surprised, excited, and interested.
It's a great way to cheer up New York City commuters. All right, now, did you figure out that last question I asked you? Remember, what was the name of the treaty that led to the Hunger Games? It is the Treaty of Treason. That is it for our quizzes today. And you know what? That is it for today's WSJ Off Duty. I hope you'll click above to subscribe. Click like if you see something you like. I promise we will start talking about more things than the Hunger Games. What am I saying? No, we're not. We're going to keep talking about the Hunger Games all week. I'm Wendy Bounds. See you guys tomorrow.